The cup arced slow and perfect, and for a heartbeat Daniel thought he was still dreaming. The coffee hit his shirt, and the hallway turned into a quiet courtroom. Phones rose like verdicts. Laughter cut the air sharp as glass. Someone filmed it all. Someone else slid a folded note into his locker. "Watch your back." Jasmine pressed a napkin into his hand and hid a secret behind her eyes. Daniel felt every little choice weigh heavy under his ribs. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The dream came to Daniel like a taste he could not wash away. He stood in a room full of bright windows and faces he did not know. A cup of coffee trembled in a hand that was not his, and the dark brown liquid arced slow and perfect through the air. It hit him in the chest. It felt hot. He woke with his palms pressed to his shirt, as if the heat might still be there. For a long breath, he lay still and listened to the small sounds of his new house, the refrigerator humming, a car door closing 2 houses down, the faint cadence of someone running in the early morning. Outside, the sky was the hard steel color of a school bus window. He told himself it was only a dream. He told himself the hot weight on his chest was only the thin blanket and the early sun. He was new at Jefferson High. New still tightened his jaw when he smiled, making his laughter arrive a beat late. Daniel Carter had learned to measure himself in small things, the exact angle of his backpack strap, how to stand so his height did not read as a challenge, and how to make his voice sound like it belonged here. The first week had been a series of small tests, who would nod back in the hallway, which teacher would call on him, who would sit near him in history. He had come from 2 towns over, from a house with a porch light that smelled of lemon oil, and a father who taught him patience the way some people teach prayers. He had also come with a habit of keeping his hands ready. Years of Taekwondo made his body a careful library of reactions, a muscle-remembered balance, like a poem. He kept that inside, because it felt dangerous to show it. Here he wanted only to be Daniel, the new kid, not the boy people expected to swing first. Jefferson High smelled like warm metal and paper and the sweet burn of cafeteria grease. The hallway ceiling tiles hummed small echoes. Lockers opened like mouths at every bell. Daniel stepped into that river of students with his hood down, his hands briefly in his pockets, and his shoulders pressed small against his book bag. He watched faces. Some were blank, some bored, some sharp with small cruelty. He knew how to read the half-smile that preceded a joke with teeth. He had seen it once before in middle school and learned to count the seconds between the smile and the shove. The seconds were always fewer than he wanted. On the wall near the main entrance, someone had taped up posters for clubs, drama club in purple marker, debate team with stiff letters, and an old flyer for the spring musical ripped at the corner. Daniel's eyes caught the posters the way they always did. Stray images lodged in a mind that collected details like shells. A girl with a yellow backpack laughed on the stairs. A boy with a skateboard under his arm scanned his phone and looked through people the way some people looked through glass. Daniel breathed out slowly. He told himself to breathe. It was a small command, but it steadied him. He passed by the bleachers where freshmen clustered like islands and the lockers where gum was stuck like small crimes to the metal. The impartial voice would say, Jefferson was a school of ordinary rhythms. Bells, passing periods, the slow geometry of schedules. For the first few days, Daniel moved through it like a calculator. Correct, but distant. No one had asked about his Taekwondo at orientation. No one asked about his last name. He found his locker between a row where the paint had flaked and a row where initials had been carved sharp. He slid his combination with careful fingers and tucked in his books. The locker smelled faintly of old spray deodorant. A folded piece of paper lay at the very back, like a secret dropped by the last tenant. He smoothed it open. The note had 3 short lines. New here? Don't be weird. Kyle. Daniel let the paper hang in his hand like a small weight. He could have folded it and thrown it away, or he could have gone straight to a teacher. He put it into his pocket. Kyle Turner. The name arrived as a shape in his mind, because names in a new place always landed like seeds. You plant them by the edges of the day and wait to see what blooms. The girl with the yellow backpack passed, smiling at something on her phone. In dream time, the coffee had been on his shirt already. In real time, it was only a slight heat in his chest where the memory of waking sat. He had learned not to reply at once. He had learned that answers sometimes fed whatever wanted to be fed. He kept his face smooth and walked toward his first period. World history with Mr. Lang, whose sweater always had a loose thread at the cuff. Inside the classroom, the chairs scraped. The sunlight came in through blinds that made a zebra of everything. Daniel sat at a desk near the window, not at the back where boys claimed their territory, not at the center where the loud voices gathered. He opened his notebook to a page he had left for morning thoughts and found a small corner of calm in the lined paper. People said new boys carry a kind of silence like a secret. Daniel felt that silence as both protection and demand. He had practiced breathing through it in the empty parking lot before school, between the cars and the cracked asphalt where he ran kicks into the air. A muscle remembers its language. On the surface of the body, he was calm. Inside, memories folded like paper cranes. A teacher who once asked him to demonstrate a stretch and the room going quiet. A bus ride where a voice called him something meant to make him smaller. He did not want to be smaller here. The narrator leans in, voice soft and close. He had a hunger to be seen for himself, not for the rumors a name might carry. There was a kindness in Daniel that surprised even his own hands, a readiness to offer a pencil or to pass a note about homework. He would learn names, not to collect them, but to remember small details. Mr. Lang who chewed mint gum, Jasmine in art who doodled eyes on everything. He was not without pride, but his pride had been tempered into a quieter thing. A steady spine, a watchful patience. He loved the way a hallway could suddenly turn into a stage and feared the suddenness of cruelty. He knew that sometimes kindness makes one visible, and being visible is a risk. The impartial observer would note the first signs, as if tallying weather changes. On the third day, Kyle Turner sat at a table in the cafeteria like a small rumor made human. He had a soft crew cut and a laugh that gathered other laughs. Two boys sat with him whose faces were all angles, Blake and Jared. They passed a thermos between them and seemed to measure the distance between their words and the rest of the room. Daniel chose a table under the high windows, where the sunlight sliced the tables into strips. He carried his lunch in a brown paper bag and unwrapped it carefully, the way one unwraps small opportunities. He kept his back to the wall so he could see the door, the note folded in his pocket. The lunchroom noise had a constant beat. Trays, the clink of cutlery, a chorus of voices. Daniel ate slowly, listening and watching. Kyle watched him back with the same open measurement, like a person surveying a chessboard. The thermos moved. The boy named Blake whispered something and pointed. A laugh passed. It was small, reheated like microwave popcorn. Daniel's shoulders tightened only slightly. He had the habit of folding his wrists into readiness, not to strike, but to protect the space his chest kept for himself. It was the kind of movement that comes from years of training, a body that always keeps its options open. Daniel pushed the napkin into the corner of his plate and stood when the bell rang. Outside, the air tasted like coming rain. He kept his head down and his steps even. In his pocket, the folded paper scratched against his thigh. He would not make the first move. He would not be the story made by other people's hands. He would let the day write itself, and he would read the lines with the same slow care with which he practiced his forms. One careful motion into the next, every move a sentence of intent. The bell after lunch was a rough, sudden thing that pushed people forward like a tide. Daniel moved with the tide, hands in his pockets, the folded paper heavy at his hip. He had told himself the day would pass in small, almost invisible pieces. A question from Mr. Lang about the Silk Road, a quiet walk between classes, the careful counting of heartbeats before tests. He did not expect to be the anchor for a storm. The first sign came as a sound, a low, practiced laugh that belonged to someone who had learned cruelty the way others learn a language. Kyle's laugh cut across the hallway and landed on Daniel like a stone. Kyle stood with Blake and Jared in front of the trophy case, a place where light made glass speak in silent clinks. He held a paper cup, the cafeteria logo blurred on the side. The steam rose thin and smelled of burnt sugar. Daniel slowed without thinking. His eyes found the cup as one reads the title of a book. For a moment the world narrowed, lockers, posters, a girl tying her shoe, all the edges softened. The empathetic voice. Daniel felt the old, quiet coil in his chest tighten. A memory rose unbidden, older than Jefferson High. A playground, a smaller boy, a cup of water tossed like a verdict. He could feel the heat of the coffee even before it hit him. A phantom sensation that rode the memory like a shadow. Years of practicing Taekwondo made him notice the physics of small things, the angle of a wrist, the weight of a cup, the way a body commits before the mind catches up. He did not want to move first. He kept his hands in his pockets, because hands that move too quickly become reasons for others to think the worst. Kyle stepped toward him with a smile that was all readiness. "Hey, new kid, you lost." His voice bounced against the lockers like a coarse coin. Blake snickered. Jared filmed with his phone, the blue light a small distant ocean. There was an audience already, a small amphitheater of crude curiosity. People flicked their heads up from their phones the way birds lift when a cat walks through. The impartial observer would note how actions arranged themselves into choices. Kyle's cup was not full. The coffee clung to the sides as if holding itself back. He moved as if deciding a small cruelty had to be ceremonial to feel right. The cup came up to Daniel's chest level, an intimate place, always vulnerable, and Kyle tipped it with a smooth, rehearsed gesture. The dark liquid arced in a slow, terrible parabola. Time, at that second, adopted the shape of an exhale. It hit Daniel's shirt with a sound like a soft slap, and heat screamed across his skin. The cafeteria scent, sugar, frying oil, bleach, blurred into a single sharp note of alarm. Students near them made small, animal noises of surprise. Blake laughed, higher this time, but it had an edge that showed he was waiting for an outcome to validate him. Jared kept filming. A cluster of girls behind Kyle shrieked in a way meant to puncture, not to help. Daniel tasted copper at the back of his mouth. The coffee soaked his shirt and slithered down his ribs, a hot trail that made his skin want to pull back. For a flicker he felt not anger, but the old, raw, animal feeling of being small and exposed. The empathetic voice knew this feeling. It had lived in Daniel before, in other rooms, other crowds. He could have struck then, in the first beat, when surprise softens judgment and a body can move without consequence. His muscles remembered the kick that could have taken Kyle off his feet, the block that could have snapped a wrist. He had a technique that could make laughter stop. He did not move. He stepped back instead, slow and deliberate, letting the wet fabric cool. "Don't," he said softly, and the word was an island. It was not a plea. It was a boundary. Kyle grinned like a man who had already won a bet. "What, you gonna cry?" he said. Someone nearby hissed. Mr. Lang, passing by with a stack of papers, looked up but moved on, eyes sliding off like water on a leaf. No teacher made the air go still. A phone chimed with applause, the kind you get from people who think cruelty is entertainment. The crowd's mood shifted to the currency of spectacle. They had seen a thing, and in that seeing, they were complicit. Daniel felt the sting not just on his skin, but somewhere near the hinge of his ribs, where shame sits like a second coat. He kept his voice even. "It's okay," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's okay." The impartial observer would note the small clue that matters later. Jared's filming angle was not accidental. He had tilted his phone slightly so that the trophy case glass reflected more than the scene. A shadow at the edge, a person not yet part of the theater. In the reflection, someone stood behind the group, half hidden under the stairwell, hands stuffed in pockets, watching with a face Daniel did not yet know belonged to anyone but the building. The reflected face was thin and intent, a watcher who would remember when other people forgot. Daniel's chest ached in a way that had little to do with heat. He smelled his own coffee on his shirt, and it felt like someone had printed the moment on him. A girl, Jasmine from art class, the one who drew eyes in margins, stepped forward with a napkin, her hand trembling. "Here," she said. The napkin was offered like a treaty. Kyle snatched it with a grin and wiped as if offended had been a contest won. His friends laughed. The line between apology and dominance blurred into nothing. Daniel let Jasmine press the napkin to his chest. Her fingers brushed his skin and left a small trail of cool in the wake of the coffee's heat. For a second he saw something in her face. Worry, maybe, or the kind of guilt that starts soft and can grow into bravery. She looked away quickly when he met her eyes, like someone who had spoken aloud a truth that scared her. That movement put a bookmark in his mind. He would remember which way she turned. The moral weight of the scene settled into the corridor like dust. Someone filmed the smear, someone laughed, someone looked away. The implicit rules had stacked themselves neatly. Humiliation spreads faster than truth. Teachers are often late to enter scenes played out on student time. Friends can be warm or cold, depending on the temperature of a room. Daniel folded the napkin into his palm and let it go when the bell rang again. He wanted to leave the space as if he had not been marked. At home later, he would scrub at the stain until the fabric wore thin. Right then, he carried the wetness as an argument he would have to answer. The empathetic voice knew his restraint had both courage and calculation. Years of Taekwondo taught him more than kicks. It gave him a way to hold himself, so his actions could be chosen, not forced. He could feel the future narrowing into two paths. One where he retaliated and made himself into the story they expected, and one where he let the humiliation sit like a coal in his pocket until he could decide what to do with its heat. Hidden motives rubbed under the surface like moths in fabric. Kyle's smile had a rehearsed line that suggested a motive beyond simple boredom, a need to be seen, a marketable cruelty that buys status. Blake's laugh carried something else, a hunger for Jacobian proof of dominance. Jared's filming meant the act would live beyond the hallway, an image to be replayed and amplified. Jasmine's quick apology hinted at conscience and the possibility of courage or collapse later on. The impartial observer would finally note a final, quieter detail. When Daniel left the hall, a small paper slid from the inside of his locker, the same folded note from the first week, now reopened and smoothed as if read by several hands. On it, a new line had been written in a different hand. "Watch your back. Anon." Daniel felt a small prickle along his spine when he read those words, as if the sentence pressed a coin into the back of his neck. Betrayal was not yet a word he used for this, but the note pressed at the shape of the day like a thumb. He folded it away and kept walking. The storm had not yet spoken its name. The days after the hallway felt like a slow, tightening loop. Daniel woke with the taste of coffee in his mouth more often than not because he imagined the burn again, but because his mind kept replaying the shapes of what had happened. He kept his shirts at the back of the drawer where the light did not reach, as if keeping things out of sight could keep them out of memory. At school, the folded note in his pocket creased like a small promise. "Watch your back. Anon." It moved in his mind from warning to puzzle to a small, cold knot. The empathetic voice leans close. He did not want to be known as someone who hit back. The lessons he had learned in the dojang were not about proving strength with a fist. Master Peter used to say, "A true fighter picks the moment like a gardener picks fruit. Not all fruit is ripe." Daniel sat with that sentence as if it were a cup of tea that cooled slowly. When he closed his eyes, he could feel the weight of his training in the quiet of his bones. Balance, breath, the old counting of forms. Each movement had taught him the value of pause. That pause now felt like a thin line between being right and being ruined. At lunch, Jasmine found him again. She moved with the same nervous energy he had seen when she offered the napkin. Her yellow backpack bounced in small waves as she walked. She sat down without asking, the art student way of making space by simply sitting in it. Her sketchbook was open and full of crude eyes that stared up at the cafeteria lights. "Hey," she said, and her voice was low as if the room were listening. Daniel folded his napkin, the one from lunch, into a neat square and looked at her. "Hey." She chewed on the corner of her lip. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't know what to do." Her fingers left a faint smudge of charcoal on the corner of the page, like a small, accidental signature. "Kyle, he's like that. He likes it. People laugh with him, and he thinks it's a club or something." The impartial observer would note that apologies in corridors mean more than the words. They are transactions. Jasmine's apology came with a trade-off. She wanted to be kind, but not to pay too high a price. She looked around as if measuring the crowd for approval or blame. The eyes on her page were quick, protective drawings. She drew to understand, to make sense of the faces that hurt. Daniel's hands felt steady. He could have wiped the stain in the bathroom and left it at that. Instead, he said, "Thanks." It was not much. It was not a declaration. It was a key. "You okay?" Jasmine asked, simple and blunt. He kept his voice even. "I'll be fine." She watched him for a long beat and then nodded. "If you ever need. I know a place to draw. It's quiet after school. You're welcome." The offer was small but honest, and Daniel noticed that honesty was like a light. At home, that evening he called his father. The conversation was a thin rope stretched across distance. His father's voice in the receiver had the steady warmth of the porch light that used to be on when Daniel came home late. "Keep your head, son," his father said. "People will make you into a story if you let them. Don't hand them the ending." The empathetic voice hears the ache in the advice. Daniel wanted to be more than a lesson other people used for gossip. He wanted his life to be his own sentences, not borrowed lines. But his stomach kept tightening at the thought that the hallway had been filmed, that the image could leave the school and breathe in other people's mouths. He imagined strangers deciding who he was from 3 seconds of motion. It sent a slow cold through him. The next day, a version of the film slid across screens. Jared, who sat laughing behind Kyle, had posted the clip to a social feed with a caption meant to be a punchline. The impartial observer would note how fast small things turn big once the internet touches them. Phones buzzed like a sudden hive. Reactions multiplied in the way mold does on bread, unseen until it grows. People added jokes in the margins. Some added cruel filters that turned the scene into a looped humiliation. The clip gathered a hashtag and, like a small storm, changed the map of the school. Jasmine found Daniel in the art room that afternoon, cheeks flushed from a bicycle ride or the news feed. Maybe both. She shut the door behind her like a small private curtain. "I saw it," she said. "I'm sorry." Daniel had already seen it. He had watched the footage once and then turned it off. The video showed the arc of the coffee and then a paused frame of the wet shirt. Jared's angle left out the moment when Daniel stepped back calmly. That space had been edited away, so the story read cleaner. The online voice wanted one simple truth, spectacle. It did not want nuance. He felt something like dizziness at the unfairness. "They cut it," he said. "They made it look." He stopped because words had started to sound like the same thin cloth that never fit. Jasmine's fingers curled around her sketchbook. "People will believe what's easiest," she said. "That's the worst part." Daniel thought of Master Peter and his garden of decisions. How does one choose a moment when the whole world seems to be shouting answers? The temptation to respond with force felt like a warm coal in his palm. It burned without clarity. It would leave marks. Meanwhile, the trio, Kyle, Blake, Jared, did not vanish. Kyle walked the halls with the loose air of someone who had won. He winked at the cameras of other boys and pretended the fire he had lit was only for warmth. Blake's grin held a hardness that did not fade. Jared refreshed his feed like a man watching a scoreboard. They started to stand closer to Daniel in passing, casual in the way that meant threat more than friendship. Each small brush of the shoulder in the hallway tightened the knot in Daniel's chest. A turning thread began to reveal itself. Who laughed with Kyle, and who laughed because they were afraid not to. Daniel watched names on the comments section change from teasing to cruel. Some were anonymous trolls, others classmates who would not have dared laugh if the corridor were full of teachers. The old rules of face-to-face cruelty were being rewritten for a place where people could punch from behind screens. The impartial observer would record these ripples as social currency shifting its weight. Home again, Daniel went through the motions of practice. He shadowed kicks in the living room, a form without contact, a poem without paper. Master Peter's voice came back to him like a metronome. Control, Daniel. Strike with purpose. Speak with less noise. The practice did more than move his body. It steadied him. He breathed into the pause until the coal in his hand cooled to ash. Yet the ash had memory, and memory sometimes lights easily. In the quiet, Jasmine's offer of the drawing room played over in his mind like a map. He remembered the note inside his locker and the anonymous handwriting that had warned him. Who warned and who recorded? Who would help and who would fake it? All of these questions sat like small stones. Each one warmed when touched. Daniel realized that the day's fight had already split into more than one kind of battle. A private one with his own choices, and a public one where the truth could be folded into anything. The empathetic voice knows fear and steadiness can live together. Daniel kept both. He learned to fold his anger into plans, to hold his hurt so it could turn into action later. He began to watch not as a man wanting to strike, but as a man learning the shape of the people around him. Who steps forward to help, who laughs, who looks away, and who writes anonymous warnings that might be either kindness or a trap. The school had become a small stage with heavy curtains, and behind those curtains the next scene was waiting to begin. The day the first twist came, the sky was a tired gray that made the school windows look like mirrors. Daniel had learned to notice small weather, as if it were a mood. A washed-out sky meant people moved slowly, hiding behind their jackets. Bright sun made voices bolder. He chose the gray for his thinking. After practice, he biked past the river and let the cold air slap his face. He liked the way wind could clear small things away for a moment. Jasmine had asked him to meet in the art room after school. Her note was the kind that tries not to alarm. Short, 3 words, a place. He remembered the way she had offered him the napkin earlier. Remembered the quick turn of her head when he had looked at her. He had wanted to believe in the small kindness. If people were maps, kindness was the only road he could trust right now. The art room smelled like paint and rubbing alcohol, and the faint sweetness of dried glue. The lights were low, the blinds half closed, so the room looked like a safe cave. Jasmine sat at a table in the back with her sketchbook open, but she did not sketch. Her hands were folded tight, as if keeping a small animal from running away. When she saw him, her mouth formed a line. "Thanks for coming," she said before he could ask. Her voice was thin. Daniel put his bag down and sat across from her. He watched her eyes. They were honest in a way that could still hide things. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at the window, then back at him. She breathed in a way that cut off the air for a second. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the video." He felt the familiar fold in his stomach. "Go on." She swallowed. "I saw Jared post it." "I wanted to." She stopped. Her hands moved, restless. "I wanted to tell someone it wasn't right. I told Mr. Lang. But it wasn't enough." Her eyes met his. "I didn't realize how far it would go." The empathetic voice draws close. Daniel believed her at first, because hope is sometimes a muscle you want to exercise. He watched her face, looking for the honest marks of shame or fear, and found them there. The kind that come from being small in a big room. Jasmine's confession twisted, though, and the room tightened like a fist. "There's more," she said. I didn't just watch. I helped." The words fell into the quiet and made the lights seem too bright. Daniel's hand stopped moving. He had expected an apology, a story of helplessness. He had not expected this. "How did you help?" His voice was careful, because he wanted to hold his temper in a clean shape. She looked at her hands and then at him. "I passed Kyle a different clip the day before." She said it like one says a weather report. It was short. He wanted the part that looked best. He said if I didn't help, he'd put something about my brother online. He said he'd ruin Sam's tryout. Her fingers shook. "I thought it would stop. I thought if I gave him a small thing, he'd be satisfied and leave me alone." The impartial observer notes how the light shifts when stories add pressure. Daniel felt the blood move in his throat. The betrayal landed like a cold stone. The girl who had offered him a napkin had also fed the fire that burned his name. It did not feel like an enemy strike. It felt more like a cracked joint in a machine you trusted. "You did what?" Daniel's voice came out quieter than he expected. "Betrayal, even if hidden, tastes metallic." "I thought I could control it," Jasmine said. Her words rushed, tripping on each other now. "Kyle promised me. He promised he'd only make it seem like a joke. He said I'd be safe if I helped. He said he'd stop Blake if I." Her sentences broke like thread. "I was scared. I didn't want Sam to lose his chance." The sympathetic voice understands fear that trades one risk for another. Jasmine had chosen a smaller wrong, or so she thought. Daniel remembered her charcoal-smudged fingers. He remembered how quickly she had looked away when he'd met her eyes. Those small things are now cut. He felt foolish for having leaned toward her warmth. "How long?" he asked, and the question was more than curiosity. It was an attempt to measure the size of the wound. "Since the second week," she said. "I passed him a clip of us laughing. I thought it was harmless. It was dumb. It made Jared edit the rest to look worse." She hugged herself like someone trying to stop an internal leak. An anger rose in Daniel that had nothing to do with motion. It was the slow kind that sits in your ribs and grows sharp. He wanted to strike the table or shout into the paint-scented air. Instead, he kept his voice small. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled. "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if I told you, I'd be revealing how much I'd done. Because he said I couldn't." She stopped, the sentence unfinished like a curtain that didn't fall. The twist tightened as more details spilled. Jasmine admitted she had been part of a group chat where the video was shared, where people had added cruel comments. She had laughed at times because laughing was armor. She had sent edits because Kyle had promised protection. The room, once a safe cave, now felt like a place where secrets had been sharpened into tools. The impartial voice picks up a smaller detail. Earlier, when Daniel had folded the napkin, he had noticed a faint charcoal smudge, like a fingerprint of guilt. Now it seemed to me more. Jasmine's charcoal marks were not just art. They were proof of presence in the machinery of small social cruelties. "You should have trusted me," Daniel said. The words were not full of blame only. They held exhaustion. Trust, once broken, is not a single fracture. It splinters. "I know," she whispered. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want Sam to lose his scholarship. I wanted to be brave, but I wasn't brave the right way." There was a pause that sounded like a choice. Daniel could make the pain become fuel for a reaction that would make the school remember him as the boy who had hit back, and then everyone would have another story to sell. He could also keep the hurt and turn it into something quieter and more dangerous. Proof, plans, a way to hold people accountable, without giving the crowd another moment of spectacle. As the art room light cut the dust motes into slow things, another detail arrived like a shadow at the edge. Jasmine reached into her bag and took out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Daniel with hands that trembled. On it were screenshots, messages from Kyle's number, the group chat with Jared, and a message that read, "I'll ruin Sam if you don't help." Her confession was backed by the small paper like a witness. Daniel held the paper as if it were a hot coal. The betrayal had depth now. Not only had Jasmine helped, she had been blackmailed. The story became not a simple cruelty, but an ugly knot of power and fear. He felt anger, yes, but also a fierce, strange compassion. People who betray sometimes worship fear the way others worship stars. They think it saves someone. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it kills trust. The storyteller's voice leans in. This revelation did not end the trouble. I redirected it. Now the battle had more players. Kyle's cruelty had become a network. Jared's filming had been enabled by others. Jasmine's betrayal, half willful, half forced, shifted the map. Daniel could no longer read the school in black and white. Allies hid behind smiles, and enemies wore jokes that had teeth. He looked at Jasmine, and in her face he saw both cowardice and courage. She had lied, yes. She had helped, yes. But she had also chosen, finally, to tell him. That choice would matter later. Daniel folded the screenshots and put them in his pocket as if they were instruments. He did not know yet whether he would use them for defense or offense. He only knew the world had changed shape. Outside, the air had cooled further. Daniel left the art room with a new weight in his bag. The betrayal stung, but it also opened a window. If the first wound had been a public humiliation, this new knowledge made the story private and complex. It gave him a kind of map he had not had before, who to watch, who to protect, and the uncomfortable fact that sometimes the people who hurt you most love someone else enough to be scared. The days tightened like a noose of small things. Each morning Daniel woke, and the memory of coffee on his shirt waited like a bruise. At night he ran forms in the living room until the lamp threw his shadow long across the wall. The movements soothed him because they were tasks with clear edges. Breath, stance, strike, then return to stillness. Outside the windows, the neighborhood moved on. Inside, the problem sat under his ribs and whispered choices. He kept the screenshots in his pocket like a hot thing. Sometimes he would take them out and look at them again, as if more reading would change the meaning. The messages showed Kyle's number, Jared's post, the group chat where boys traded edits and laughter. One message read, "I'll ruin Sam if you don't help." The little typed letters had weight. They were not just words. They had pushed a real boy to fear. The more Daniel studied them, the more he felt the rough shape of what had to be done. He could keep all of it to himself and bruise inward. Or he could make the hidden visible and risk turning private wounds into public battles. He tried to talk to Mr. Lang, thinking a teacher could hold the map straight. The classroom smelled of old paper and chalk dust. Mr. Lang listened with the kind of brow that meant he was making a calculation between rules and trouble. "Social media is messy, Daniel," he said finally. "We can talk to the administration, but public posts are hard to control. I'll speak with the principal." The promise was small and felt distant, like a boat someone said they would send, but had not yet launched. The principal, when Daniel finally sat across from her, had an office that smelled of lemon cleaner and soft power. She read a short report and sighed. "We can't punish kids for what they say outside school unless it reaches school grounds and disrupts learning," she said. "If you feel threatened, we can give you walking escorts between classes." Her words landed like legal pads covering fire. They meant safety in form, but little cure for shame. Daniel left feeling both protected and hollow. Meanwhile, Kyle did not slow. If anything, the attention fed him. He posted a sharper edit with a mocking caption and tagged several teammates. The clip spread faster than the principal's memos could travel. Some teachers rolled their eyes and shrugged. The school had become a machine where events fed content and content fed reputations. Daniel watched as people made simple judgments from angles that did not show the whole room. Sam's tryout was the thing that made Daniel's stomach go cold at night. The coach called Sam the day after the new clip appeared and asked pointed questions about a rumor the coach had seen online. Sam's voice on the phone sounded small and prickled. "They said something about me on a forum," he told Daniel when he came over. "They said I used a fake injury to get out of practice and get scholarship sympathy." The words fell like knives. Sam's scholarship was not secure. Rumor could twist an application into dust. The fear in Sam's face made Daniel feel a hot and urgent thing, protectiveness, like a counterweight to the ash in his pocket. Jasmine tried to help, but her presence complicated everything. She came to Daniel after school one afternoon, eyes raw. "I told my brother what happened," she said. "He got angry at me. He said I should have been braver earlier." She folded her hands and looked smaller than her frame. "I can tell the coach what Kyle did. I can show them the messages." Her offer was pure but dangerous. Exposing Kyle publicly might free Sam's name, but it would also burn Jasmine's place in the school. She had lied and then been blackmailed. Coming forward could cost her friends, perhaps even her safety. Daniel felt the split between what justice demanded and what mercy required. His body wanted the old, simple answer, strike the cause and stop the pain. But his mind remembered Master Peter's lessons about timing and consequence. He thought of his father's quiet counsel. Don't hand them the ending. If Daniel hit Kyle and the video showed it, the internet would take both moments and make a new story, a new spectacle, a new reason to laugh. If he exposed Kyle with the screenshots, the court of public opinion might decide everything without hearing all voices. Both paths could help Sam. Both paths could also ruin more than intended. He started a quiet plan. Not violence. Not silence. Evidence and patience. He needed to catch more than the edited clip. If he could get Jared's raw footage, the one that showed Daniel stepping back, he could show a full truth. If he could find others who had been pushed or threatened, he could build a net of testimony rather than a single spear that might splinter. That search brought new wounds. People were afraid. A sophomore girl who had once been shoved by Blake refused to speak when Daniel asked. "If I say anything, they'll make me the next joke," she said. "They'll call me a tattletale." The fear was practical and honest. Another boy whispered a half story and then put his head down. Each refusal felt like a small betrayal, but Daniel tried not to collect anger against them. He learned that fear makes people small in other ways. Kyle noticed the shift. He started to move closer when Daniel passed, a smile that had gone thin with purpose. He and his two friends would block the locker rows sometimes, making the path tight. One day, Kyle stepped in front of Daniel and slowed him. "You got a problem?" he asked, voice light with malice. The corridor's noise seemed to thin. Jared lingered with his phone like a priest with a relic. Blake's jawline flashed. The scene is set like a trap. Daniel felt his pulse move into the place where the urge to act lived. He could feel the old reflex, a fast kick, a precise block, the kind of motion that would stop a body cold. It would also give Kyle the footage he wanted, Daniel striking. The cameras would love that frame. People online would take a boy's right to defend himself and turn it into a tournament of who was meaner. Daniel had to choose a path that protected Sam's name without giving the internet a fresh, juicy clip. He turned away slowly. "Not today," he said, voice flat. His hands were empty. It was not a weakness. It was a tactic. He made a note in his head. Find Jared's backyard where he edits videos, or find a teacher who would take the raw footage seriously. Keep the screenshot safe. Keep the plan quiet. The choice felt like walking a narrow ridge, but he liked that it had purpose. That night, Master Peter came by the house with a loaf of bread and the kind of silence that carries company. They sat at the kitchen table under the lamp, the clock ticking like a metronome for thought. "Control is not only about what you can break," Master Peter said. "It's about what you won't let the world make of you. You can make an example of yourself, but be sure it's the kind you want carved in the long run." His words were simple and heavy. Daniel held them like a compass. Daniel slept poorly. dreams full of glass and coffee, and the trophy case warped into mirrors. He woke with his forehead wet and his hands tight. In the morning, his phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number read, "Meet me at the old bleachers after practice. Come alone." The text had no sender name, no hint. It smelled like trouble, and also like a finger pointed at his spine. He could think, a trap. He could think, a lead. His pulse climbed and settled into the old steady drum. He folded the phone back into his pocket, the screenshots next to it. He knew he could choose silence, exposure, violence, or cunning. Each path had costs. Each path had a consequence that could widen the wound or close it. He picked a path that used the sharpness of his mind more than his body. He would go to the bleachers, but he would not go alone entirely. He told himself to be careful, to watch for cameras, to move like a man who has practiced restraint. The moral weight of his choice sat at his throat as he rode his bike to practice, the wind cutting like a blade. The storm had not yet broken. It was only assembling its thunder. The old bleachers smelled like wet wood and grass and the kind of cold that presses into your lungs. Twilight had turned the sky a flat pewter, and the lamps along the track had not yet come on. Daniel's bike sighed as he leaned it against the metal and walked up the steps, the screenshots burning like a promise in his pocket. He kept his hands empty and his breath even. He wanted to be ready for motion, but not for drama made by his own hands. He was not alone. Phones blinked in pockets like small moths. A few faces he knew drifted in from the parking lot. Jasmine, who stood with her arms folded as if to hold herself together. Sam, pale but steady. Master Peter, broader in the shoulders than Daniel remembered, and Mr. Lang, who held his collar like an armor of school rules. Jared was there too, but he kept his head down, hands buried in his jacket. Kyle waited at the bottom of the bleachers with Blake beside him. The three friends like weather that had hardened into predictability. Jared's phone lay on the top rail like a quiet witness. The impartial voice notes the choreography. Each person had chosen their place for a reason. Kyle's smile looked practiced, the way a man wears a winning shirt. Blake's jaw was tight. Jared's eyes flicked around like someone looking for an exit he did not have. The small crowd made a circuit of murmurs and the smell of cold metal and cheap cologne. Daniel climbed slowly until he stood facing them, the world reduced to the circle of faces lit by the last light. "You asked me to come alone," he said. His voice was steady. "I came." Kyle's laugh had no warmth. "We just wanted to talk, new kid. Make things right. Own up a little." He sounded casual, which made him more dangerous. Jared's phone camera already pointed. Someone in the crowd must have turned on a live feed. The empathetic voice. Daniel felt the coal of anger in his pocket. He had decided against hitting, not because he was afraid, but because he knew what the internet would do with the footage. He wanted instead to make the world see what it had edited away. He kept his hands where they could be seen. "Play it," Kyle said, a dare wrapped in a smirk. Jared swallowed. For a breath, he seemed about to speak for his old side. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small USB drive Daniel had asked him for in a quiet corridor 2 nights before. Jared's hand shook. He had told Daniel he would bring raw footage if Daniel came to the bleachers. Now, under the gray sky and the weight of all those watching, he took a step forward. "This is the unedited clip," Jared said, voice thin. I didn't want to help at first. Kyle forced me. But I saved the original. I can't keep doing this." He thrust the drive into Daniel's palm like a confession. The crowd hummed. Kyle's mouth hardened into a line. Blake's face flickered. The small theater of the moment held its breath. Daniel plugged the drive into Jared's phone and connected it to a small speaker Mr. Lang had brought. The raw footage spilled into the quiet. The hallway, the tilt of Kyle's wrist, the cup, the arc of the coffee, the exact pause when Daniel stepped back and did nothing more than breathe out. The frame showed the full context, The way Kyle's friends waited for a reaction. The way Jared's camera angle had been altered later to cut out the step back. In the footage, Kyle's face looked smaller, less victorious. The sound of the crowd in the recording was different. It held an uncomfortable silence that made laughter now feel like an intrusion. The visceral moment of truth landed like rain. Phones lowered and faces shifted. A few students let out a sharp noise, not quite a sound of joy, but the relief of truth waking them up. Kyle's eyes flicked from the screen to the people around him, to Blake, to Jared, as if measuring how many hands still cupped his story. "I edited it," Jared said, the words raw. "I made it look worse. I'm sorry. Kyle told me to cut the part where he stepped back because it looked funnier. He said it would make him stronger." Jared pointed at Kyle like the finger of a small, guilty god. His voice broke. "I thought it was just a joke." The crowd's mood turned like the weather. Jasmine stepped forward, breath visible in the cold. "I helped," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but did not break. "I helped because they threatened Sam. I thought it would stop. I am sorry." She looked at Sam and then at Daniel, and the apology landed like a small, necessary stone. Sam's face was pale but resolute. He moved closer, the coach's name already on his lips. He showed the coach a message in his phone, proof of lies spread to his tryout. The coach, who had come when he heard there was trouble, read and then read again, the lines of his face folding. He turned to the principal, who had arrived breathless, and all the small administration scripts found new words for themselves when the raw footage slid in front of the rules. Blake's face reddened. For a moment he tried to stay with Kyle, to smile like loyalty was a warm coat. Then something in his expression unspooled. The tightness gave way to a flash of shame that became a confession. "I helped reorder the locker incident," he said, voice small. "I thought if we made other kids look bad, then we wouldn't be judged. I didn't know it would." His sentence broke. He turned to Kyle as if seeking permission to keep being a friend. Kyle looked ready to swallow him whole. The second twist was subtle and brutal. One after another, people who had seemed monolithic cracked. Allies revealed themselves to be frightened boys who had traded integrity for safety. The betrayal that had once felt purely Jasmine's now appeared as a network of small compromises, each one pushed by fear, by the need to belong, by the pressure of a single alpha's joke. Kyle's voice grew loud and poisonous. "You don't get to turn on me," he spat. "You all knew what this was. It's not my fault you're thin-skinned." He reached for the easy script to blame. Some in the crowd hissed agreement, scared to appear as weak. Daniel stepped forward. The empathetic voice leans close. He wanted to speak not just for himself, but for the way small cruelties grow. He held the speaker like it was a small altar. "You can make a person a story," he said, voice steady and clear, "or you can make them a person. You chose spectacle. You chose to make us all laugh while someone's life narrowed." His eyes moved to each of them, to Jared who had flipped, to Jasmine who had confessed, to Blake who had broken, and finally to Kyle, who now looked very small indeed. But there is truth, and truth matters. Silence settled like snow. The principal read the chat logs and the footage, then called in the coach and the parents. Consequences began to be named in firm, necessary tones. Suspension, required counseling, a review of social media policies. Kyle's father, when he arrived, tried to pull the strings of privilege, but the school's stern staff, faced with the raw footage and the confessions, moved through their motions with a steadiness that made the man shift back. The crowd thinned as people realized this was no longer entertainment. Some students stayed, eyes wide, thinking of how small moments can become storms. Jasmine stood near Daniel, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," she said again. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not a gesture of absolution, but of recognition. She had betrayed him and then chosen to help undo it. That choice counted. Master Peter came up behind Daniel and, without saying much, put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. The touch was an anchor. Daniel felt the old lesson fit into place. There is a power in restraint, and in choosing how the story ends. When the lights finally came on along the track, they carved the faces into clearer lines. The moral of the scene was not tidy. There were apologies, yes, and punishments, but also the reality that many had been afraid long before they were cruel. The crowd dispersed with new histories tucked into pockets. Daniel walked down the bleacher steps with Sam at his side. The air smelled like wet grass and something like forgiveness, not total, but enough to breathe. He thought of his father's voice, of Master Peter's quiet law. He had not thrown a single punch. He had used patience, evidence, and a careful risk. In the end, he had chosen to reveal truth rather than to create another spectacle. Under the lamps, phones glowed as messages began to move. Some praised Daniel. Some called him a tattletale. Some tried to spin the story again. He heard it all and let it pass like wind. The scene would be retold in many tongues. He could not control who told it or how. He stood for a long moment and watched the lamps reflect on the wet metal of the bleacher rails. The narrator, impartial now, notes that the consequences were only beginning. Real change takes time and courage beyond one night. But in the cold, Daniel felt a small warmth. He had kept his body from becoming a headline, and he had made the truth harder to fold. The choice to wait, to gather evidence, to demand witness, those were the strikes that mattered. The days after the bleachers felt like walking through a room where the lights had been left on. Everything visible, everything sharper, and nothing that could hide in the dark. News of the raw footage spread slower than the viral clip had, but it spread deeper. Administrators moved with paper and policy. Parents showed up in suits that smelled faintly of aftershave and worry. Kyle was suspended pending a hearing. Jared faced disciplinary action and a requirement to delete and retract posts, and he agreed to attend restorative meetings where he had to listen more than speak. Blake's name was cleared from the worst of it when he admitted how small his courage had been, and when he agreed to help with the after-school program the principal set up for students affected by cyberbullying. Jasmine faced consequences too. She lost some privileges, and she had to speak before a panel about coercion and the choices people make under pressure. The impartial voice records the facts without tenderness and without cruelty. There were consequences, not a perfect ledger of justice, but a visible account. The principal made a rule revision that required clearer reporting channels and faster response to harmful posts. The coach defended Sam publicly, and with the raw footage and a statement from the school, Sam's tryout was reviewed again. The committee that had thought his file tarnished reconsidered. In a meeting where Daniel sat quietly, Sam was offered a position that did not yet guarantee scholarship funds, but put him back on a path where his performance could speak louder than rumor. For Daniel, the end of the public crisis was only the start of quieter work. He returned to his forms in Master Peter's dojang with a different kind of focus. The physical training felt the same, but the meaning had changed. Where his practice had once been about control and fights, it was now also about control over a life others might try to edit. He was not less ready to move. He had only become more mindful of what each motion would carry once the world watched. The empathetic voice leans closer. The hardest thing to repair was not the stain on a shirt or the shadow of a clip, but the tearing in small, simple things. Trust, the easy smile that used to belong to hallways, the casual friendship that now had to be re-examined. Jasmine's apology held weight because she had come forward and because she had been brave enough to suffer consequences. Daniel did not rush to forgive her. Forgiveness, he knew, would be a slow thing, a gradual rethreading that both would have to work on. But he did offer a steady hand when she needed it. She, in turn, worked with the new counseling group, telling her story in ways that sometimes hurt her as she spoke. That she chose honesty afterward mattered more than the comfort of a quick pardon. Some friendships became brittle and then found new strength. Sam and Daniel grew closer, not out of pity, but because they had shared a storm and stepped through it together. They repaired the small, Honest things, study sessions, practice runs, jokes that did not need an audience. Jared learned painfully how to listen. The effort he made to take responsibility changed him enough that he began to repair the harm, not through shortcuts, but through time and consistent apologies. Life returned to rhythms that resembled normal, but the memory of the coffee and of the icons on the screen stayed like a bruise one still notices when the weather changes. Daniel found himself watching small things differently. How a joke lands, who laughs first, which faces keep looking down at their phones instead of into someone's eyes. He kept his guard, not as a place for anger, but as an instrument for care. The Taekwondo in him had become less about proving power and more about choosing when to show it. There were evenings when he sat on his porch and spoke with his father. "You did the right thing," his father said quietly once, stirring his tea. Not the loud right, the steady right. Daniel listened, feeling the sentence settle like a lamp on a table. He had not become a hero in the instant way the videos promised. He had become someone who could hold a story steady enough that truth did not bend under pressure. That felt harder and better than a headline. The narrator, at times looking over the scene with calm impartiality, notes the larger shift. The school was a different place because a small act of cruelty had been made visible, and because people had to account for what they had done or allowed. Rules changed. Meetings were held. The new policies were not justice itself, but they were scaffolding toward care. More students volunteered for the restorative program. Teachers learned to listen more quickly. The internet still had its appetite for spectacle, but inside Jefferson High, edges softened as people recognized the real costs of a clip. Daniel wrestled with questions that did not have neat answers. He felt the temptation once or twice to use his skill, to make the bullying stop with force and end the story there. Each time he remembered the way Jared's edited clip had changed everything and how easily a single frame can be bent. He thought about rage as a tool and as a trap. He chose again and again the longer path, evidence, witness, patience. That choice did not erase his pain, but it made a different kind of power. The ability to change the narrative without becoming a part of the spectacle. Months later, in the art room, Jasmine showed him a drawing. It was small, a charcoal sketch of a hallway where the lockers were half open and a light slipped through like a promise. "I drew it for you," she said simply. The picture was modest and honest. Daniel looked at it and felt the slow warmth that comes when something begins again. He did not say it was okay all at once. He said, "Thank you." And that was enough for then. The final turn of the story was quiet. One afternoon, Daniel stood in front of the dojang and watched a group of younger kids practice forms. They moved like sentences in a language being learned. He saw the same hunger he had once had, to be seen, to be steady. A small boy stumbled and another helped him up without drama. The sight lodged in Daniel like a small repair. He understood, finally, that being strong is not always about preventing harm with a blow, but about shaping circumstances so that harm has fewer places to land. It is about teaching others to stand, about making rules that protect and not just punish. It is about listening to the frightened and making their words into a map. The moral was not a tidy lesson placed at the bottom of a page. It lived in the choices he made after the cameras turned away, choosing hard patience, gathering truth, and asking the people who had failed to try again. When the school year ended and summer arrived, the coffee stain was gone from the shirt he kept for practice, but the lesson it left behind was not. Daniel walked forward a little taller, not because he had won a fight, but because he had learned which fights to pick, how to hold his power, and how to make truth louder than spectacle. The world outside could still be cruel. That did not change. What had changed was the way he would meet it, steady, watchful, and ready to protect someone else before the phone could turn them into a story. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.